Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How is everyone? The year of X-Wing has officially started because we got our first reveal article for X-Wing 2nd edition for Wave 3 for the new factions. Earlier today we got some more details on the Servants of Strife. The squadron pack for the Separatist Alliance, for some reason FFG isn't calling it the CIS. In any case, we got some more details on the Belbalub and the Vulture Droid, at least the ones we get in this pack. We don't know yet if we get different unique Vulture Droids in the Vulture Droid expansion. I'm guessing at some stage that'll all be revealed. However, we definitely seem to have the bulk of the information on the Belbalub. In fact, we basically had no details on the Belbalub up to this point, so let's go through it now. We have some nice high-res images of the Mini next to its dial. Also, all the stats for the ship, and I just want to talk briefly about this before we go on to the pilots, because we got a stat line here very reminiscent of another ship in the game. 3 red attack, 2 agility, 3 hull, and 2 shields. The action bar goes focus, or calculate for some pilots, target lock, and barrel roll and boost, and both of those can be linked into a focus, or calculate for the necessary pilots. This stat line is very reminiscent of the X-Wing, and I just want to compare these just for a little bit, because I think we can now start to speculate on the cost of these now that we have a rough idea about everything that's going on in the faction. And it looks very, very similar. Essentially, the stat line is the same as the X-Wing, barring 1 point of hull. The action bar is very, very similar, although the Belbalub's is strictly better. It has access to boost and barrel roll without the need to lose one of its red dice, and it can link focuses off the back of that at all times. The dial, however, is a little bit more interesting, because the Belbalub has access to all of the hard turns at 1, 2, and 3 speed, which is always a very valuable thing. However, the X-Wing has more blue on the dial and has access to a K turn. The Belbalub only has access to Segnor's loops as special maneuvers, which is kind of weird. I think these dials are fairly comparable, although they are very different, I will admit that. Having said that, I think the Belbalub, for this reason, is going to sit at roughly the cost of the X-Wing. Although this is comparing them in a vacuum, again, I need to reiterate, when we're looking at costs of things, it does matter what faction they are. Because the Belbalub is in a faction with only 3 ships, it might be a little bit more pushed for that reason. It might turn out to be a bit cheaper. But if we're comparing it to 1-to-1, I look at these stats and I think, yeah, this is pretty close to X-Wing stats. Maybe a hair better. I think the action bar and the dial just push it a little bit over. But in terms of the way it maneuvers, not having a K-turn is always restrictive. It's not quite as bad as like the Skirg dial, which can only Talon roll. Talon rolls are extremely aggressive and are difficult to place in terms of maneuvers. It's very easy not to be able to Talon roll, especially with 3 speeds. Segnor's loops are much closer to just being U-turns anyway. It's essentially a U-turn on a little bit of a curve. So I don't think it's going to have the same issues as the Skirg. I don't think it's going to be as aggressive as the Skirg for that reason. But it's a really fun way to fly a ship. And I like the fact that the blue maneuvers are at the 2 speed instead of the 1, so it does have a bit of speed on it. Looks like a fun maneuverable ship. One more thing that the ship has that is unique is this modification card, Imperium Plating. Interesting, this is a modification, not a configuration, so I don't know why that is. I thought all ship unique cards were going to be configurations from this point on. This means that perhaps it will have a configuration card as well, or perhaps it's a balancing move. In order to take this, you must lose the opportunity to take another modification. Perhaps that's what FFG are doing here. That would actually make a lot of sense. Before you'd be dealt a face-up ship damage card, you may spend 1 charge to discard it instead. It has 2 charges, so a nice bit of durability. And I think it's pretty relevant with everything going on. It looks like there are some nice defensive abilities across all of these ships. And yeah, seems decent. In the support role, I think this is going to be a very valuable card. Of course, it'll depend how much it costs, but yeah, I dig it. Let's have a look at these pilots. We have a generic Initiative 1. Feathen Outraw Autopilot. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And this is a droid pilot, so it has calculates instead of focuses. Which, on the surface, makes it look, oh, this is just a worse version of another pilot, but it is actually very relevant that it has calculates. I'll talk about that later when we have a look at other pilots, because other droids in your squad can benefit from other calculate tokens. Moving on, at Initiative 2, we have Captain Sear. While a friendly ship at range 0 to 3, so any kind of loose formation in other words, performs a primary attack if the defender is in its bullseye firing arc. Before the neutralize result step, the friendly ship may spend 1 calculate to cancel 1 evade result. And I actually think out of all the pilots, despite the fact that this is the lowest initiative on a named pilot, in terms of being in the support role, I think Captain Sear is the most interesting because of the way he combos with Vulture Droids. There are a lot of Vulture Droids that care about things being inside the bullseye firing arc. And it's not so much a case of trying to sort of out arc dodge your opponent, trying to act like aces. All of these guys have low initiatives. It's more about flying them in formation and making all of those bullseye firing arcs sort of cover this massive zone. And you're not going to trigger this off every single one of your ship, but you're going to hopefully trigger it off at least one of them every turn. That's the idea here. And the ability is interesting. It's not great in terms of increasing the power of your offensive calculate tokens, but it does give them more consistency. Basically, you only get value offensively out of a calculate token with your red dice if you roll at least 1 focus result. But this means you will get value out of your calculate tokens as long as you either roll a focus result or your opponent generates any evade results. So it goes from being sort of likely to help on offense to very likely to help on offense. And that means if you have a bunch of ships that are consistently going to generate calculate tokens, it's very, very likely that you're going to increase the power of your attacks. I think this guy alongside a Vulture Swarm is very, very interesting indeed. It looks really, really solid. Moving on to Wat Tambor. This is one of the organic life forms in the Belbelub, so it has focuses instead of calculates. While you perform a primary attack, you may reroll 1 attack die for each calculating friendly ship at range 1 of the defender. And this is very, very similar. It cares about having a lot of Vulture Droids, probably Vulture Droids anyway, but it's more offensive in that you need to have your ships at range 1 of the defender, and they can't be blocking. And that does make this a little bit awkward. If you go in hard against your opponent and you calculate, and your opponent just rams into you, you don't get the benefit out of this. And the benefit is you get a reroll for each of those ships, and I don't know, it feels a bit awkward. I feel like you're probably going to get 1, maybe semi-consistently if you sort of swarm your opponent, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be ultra consistent. I actually feel like Captain Sear is going to trigger more consistently, despite the fact it's a lower initiative. In fact, on Sear, I don't think the low initiative hurts him so much because, well, you're going to fly in a swarm with a lot of low initiative ships, so whatever. Not so convinced by this one. If the costing is very similar, if it's a very, very cheap bind to get what, might be interesting. It's sort of reminiscent as well as the Pirate Queens on the Scum faction, Drea Rentha on Calf Scarlet. They care about you having friendly ships near your opponent's ships, although this is not referring to generic or something like that, so it's not quite the same thing. Interesting commander. I'm not fully convinced about this one though. And the last pilot we hear, of course, is General Grievous, another organic life form. So we have focus actions. Initiative 4, while you perform a primary attack, if you are not in the defender's firing arc, you may reroll up to 2 attack die. I really like this ability. I think as a brawling platform, that is a really powerful thing to have. However, we do have to address the fact that it's Initiative 4. That does feel a little bit awkward. If you care about arc dodging, well, Initiative 4 isn't always going to be that great. Now, yes, of course, you can fly him alongside, again, a lot of Vulture Droids and pressure your opponent into maybe having to ignore General Grievous, and that does give it a bit more upside. It just feels like it's not really that internally consistent. But look, having said that, maybe he's cheap enough and you don't care. Initiative 4 is still good. It beats out everything that's not like an ace or a brawler like Whisper, Boba Fett, and Redline and Rey and all the other Initiative 5 which are rocking the meta right now. So yeah, it feels like it's a bit awkward. I mean, maybe if the meta shifts towards more generics. I don't know, it's a bit sad. I really like General Grievous as a character, so I was hoping his pilot card might be a bit more relevant in terms of meta play. I mean, if it was Initiative 5, this would really jump off the page as me as being a really fantastic option. As it stands, I think it's solid, but I'm not entirely convinced. We'll have to see what he's like on the table. Let's move over to the Vulture Droid, and this guy looks really, really unique. In terms of the stat line and action bar, we have 2 red dice, 2 green dice, 3 hull. Strictly the worst ship in the game in terms of stats. The action bar is always calculate, because these are all droids. target lock and barrel roll to red calculate, and we have the baked in ability of network calculations. While you defend or perform an attack, you may spend 1 calculate token from a friendly ship at range 0 to 1 to change 1 focus result to a focus or hit. So essentially, you can spend a calculate off a friendly ship for the regular effect of a calculate. Just bear in mind, if there are any kind of effects like pilot abilities that allow you to spend calculate tokens to trigger them, this doesn't work with them. So just be careful of that. But this is what I was talking about before. We have a generic Initiative 1 Bellbulb pilot with the calculate action, and that's very, very relevant with this. It means even at Initiative 1, your Bellbulb can support your vultures, which is kind of cool, really. Also, the dial is bizarre. I guess this is relating to the fact that this ship is a droid. So it has to reflect that in the dial somehow, and the way they've done that is the more nuanced ability of banking is very difficult for the Vulture to do. In fact, it prefers to do hard turns. If you have a look here, its preferred speed is definitely 2. It gets Talon rolls at speed 2. The rest are blue, apart from the banks. That's kind of cool. And at 3 speed, again, it has all of the maneuvers, the hard turns, the straight and whatever, but the banks are red. Cool. That's very unique and interesting. In terms of comparing it to other ships, I guess it's similar to a TIE fighter. Doesn't have the K turns like a TIE fighter. In fact, it's K turns at speed 1, which is really aggressive. I like that. Also, Talon rolls at speed 2. This is going to be a fantastic aggressive ship to fly in swarms. I'd be curious to see what it's costed at. I think this dial is interesting. I struggle to say it's strictly better than a TIE fighter. I feel like in general it is. I'm hoping just from a list building point of view that it is just a fraction cheaper than the TIE fighter, so we can really get swarms happening with these guys. Also, apart from all that, it has this configuration card, which we did see before, but we now have some nice high resolution images. So let's have another read of this. Grappling struts closed. Setup. Equip this side face up. While you execute a maneuver, if you overlap an asteroid or debris cloud, and there are 1 or fewer other friendly ships at range 0 of the obstacle, you may flip this card. So just to clarify, we didn't have this side revealed before. And what this is saying is if you fly into and land on a rock, you can flip this. And what that's going to mean is you get to resolve the back end of this card before you have to deal with any damage. And the back end of this card does prevent you from taking damage from a rock at range 0, so you wouldn't get damage from it. It is important to clarify that. Also, you can't land on a rock if there are already at least 2 Vulture Droids on it. So you can't essentially turn 1 rock into the Death Star. Sorry guys, it's not possible. On the back end of this, you ignore obstacles at range 0, and while you move through them, after you reveal your dial, if you reveal a maneuver other than the 2 forward and are at range 0 of an asteroid or debris cloud, skip your execute maneuver step, then remove 1 stress token. If you reveal a right or left maneuver, rotate your ship 90 degrees in that direction. After you execute a maneuver, flip this card. So essentially, the only way to come off a rock is to do the 2 forward, which I do think is actually a lot of downside because you cannot in any way... It's not like the Phantom popping out of the Ghost that gets to flip its dial and pick anything on the fly. You always have to come off the rock with the same maneuver. And that gives your opponent a lot of power to block you, to counter fly you. So there is a bit of downside in using the Vulture Droid this way. However, yes, if you just keep it on the rock for the entire game, that downside is somewhat negated. But I think that is a very important part of this. It's a very important part of the way you have to strategize with this. And it has to come off the rock in a very predictable way and your opponent can counter fly that. However, yes, this is awesome. We spoke about it before, but we didn't see the front half of this card before. This seems very, very interesting, and it's the reason which the Vulture Droid might not be cheaper than the TIE Fighter. It's the thing that it clearly has over the TIE Fighter, which is strictly better, strictly something the TIE Fighter doesn't have. And it'd be really cool to see what this does to the rock meta, as it were. What kind of rocks we take. We know that there's going to be another kind of obstacle entering the game with this wave, so it's not a guarantee that all 6 obstacles are going to work with the Vulture Droid anymore. Cool, very difficult to quantify this. It's a very fun new ability. I'm very excited to see where the design takes it. Let's have a look at these pilots. And revealed in this article is a non-generic Initiative 1, the Horshall prototype, Z-Shar's offering. And this is a unique 2-pip, in that you can only ever take 2 of these in your squad. After an enemy ship in your bullseye firing arc at range 0 to 2 declares another friendly ship as the defender, you may perform a calculate or target lock action. Now this does seem powerful, I will say that. However, I do question how frequently an enemy ship in your bullseye firing arc will declare another ship the target. It seems like a very strange ability. Again, I'm thinking about using this in formation, so you're flying them so the bullseye firing arc comes directly out of your ships as like 2 pinpoints, meaning that it's difficult for your opponent to dodge both. But I just feel like your opponent is in general going to pick your ship more often anyway. And that kind of negates the downside of this. Now, against large ships where you can pinpoint both bullseye firing arcs onto the same ship, yeah, obviously your opponent can't do anything about that. And that's interesting. It might affect the meta in terms of what your opponent plays. Even medium ships, actually, come to think of it. If you can fly these guys in a very tight formation, even things like Redline is going to have a little bit inherent downside of having to attack these guys. I do say a little bit because it's not super powerful. It's not going to help the ship that is getting targeted. It means it's going to slightly improve your offensive ability on the platform that does this, which doesn't feel great. I mean, ultimately, if Redline locks down a Vulture Droid, is it going to survive? I don't think it is. And even for a lot of different options, like your turreted Falcons and that kind of thing, yeah, you're going to hit them back a bit harder, but I don't know. I don't feel like this is an ultra consistent ability. Let's move on to the other guys. We have at Initiative 3 a 3-pip sort of unique droid. Precise Hunter, Pinpoint Protocols. Alliteration is fun, you guys. While you perform an attack, if the defender is in your bullseye firing arc, you may reroll 1 blank result. I like this one a lot better, actually. Again, talking about Captain Sia on the Belbalab, this is all about just lining up a whole bunch of ships in your bullseye firing arc and basically flying around in formation that makes it difficult for your opponent to fly out of all those bullseye firing arc. Yes, you're not going to trigger it with every single one on your ships. This example that FFG gave in their articles, especially against an Initiative 6 Anakin Skywalker, come on guys, this isn't going to happen. But if you fly those guys in formation and just make those bullseye firing arcs just span across a nice zone, it's going to mean that you're probably going to trigger one of them consistently. And if you do that, especially alongside Captain Sia, which gives you even more power, it's going to give your calculate tokens more value. It's great because you can calculate across several different platforms, spend one of your friendly calculates on offense with that reroll, and spend your calculate on your opponent's evade dice. That gives your Vulture Droids a nice bit of offense. Now, yes, I know, only 2 red dice. But it's very clear to me that FFG are pushing the 2 red dice factor on these guys. And I really do want to see if FFG can design a ship with only 2 red dice that does have a really powerful bit of offensive capabilities. And I'm not talking about the TIE Advance because that gets to add more dice and change results. That doesn't really count. I mean a dedicated 2 red dice attack that can actually have a good offensive attack. And I think the Precise Hunter with things like Captain Sia is examples of designs that just might get there. Looks very, very interesting. Now, on the more defensive side, let's have a chat about this guy. DFS D81 or 081, not sure there. This is a true unique pilot. It's only a one of. Preservation Programming. While a friendly ship at range 0 to 1 defends, it may spend 1 calculate token to change all crit results to hit results. And remember again, because this is a pilot ability, you can't spend the friendly ship next to you calculate results. However, the good thing is you could use that calculate token to use it on offense or defense and use your calculate token to save those critical results. Could be relevant. These things aren't shielded, so they are very soft to criticals. Seems decent. In fact, this Captain Sia and the Precise Hunters could be a list. I mean, if we think the Belbalab is roughly the cost of an X-Wing, these guys are roughly the cost of TIE Fighters, yeah, that seems to fit. Yeah, that could be cool. Very interesting. Again, this is great with swarm flying. In fact, this is more for a dedicated swarm. It's not so much about formation flying. It feels a bit more like a TIE fighter ability. I don't know, TIE fighters are more about more powerful explosive abilities to use in swarms. These guys seem to be a bit more about generic value-driven things like heroic and fanatical, that kind of thing, which isn't hugely impactful but a bit more consistent. It's not like Howl Runner, which gives you great offense on all your TIE fighters. It's about just things eking out a bit more value, spending each other to calculate tokens, or a little bit more power on offense, or a little bit more power on defense. All of these things stacking up to buff your ships into decent fighting capabilities. I really like the Vulture Droid. I like that they've really given you a weak platform with so many incremental buffs. It's a very interesting design, and I really like the way they fly in swarms. I like the way that they are droids, but they're not functioning like droids on the other factions that are all about calculate stacking, like 4-LOM and 3PO on the Scum and Rebel faction. These guys are more about versatility and value, about spending your friendly calculate tokens, and that's very interesting. I was actually fully expecting these droids to function very similar to the ones on the Scum faction, but as a more cohesive army, but they don't token stack like the ones on the Scum faction. So yeah, mad props to FFG for at least pushing a new interesting design. Really dig it, and I'm so hyped to fly these guys. Both me and Justin have already decided to get into the CIS. It's going to be a lot of fun. Definitely going to see a lot of Vulture Swarms flown on this channel. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. A heap more stuff for Wave 3 to talk about very soon. Please like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon. It is literally what keeps the lights on this channel. Thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. You guys are absolutely awesome. I will catch all of you in the next video.